Hi everyone, I'm Shaylin here with Reedsy. So today we're going to be talking about whether or not your novel is ready to write. This is a really common concern for a lot of new novelists. Especially if it's your first book, how do you know if your book is ready to start writing or if you need to do more planning? Ultimately, this is really a personal decision. A lot of it will come down to intuition, but it can be hard to trust your intuition, and a lot of writers end up kind of postponing actually starting their book for a really long time. So here's a general breakdown of what it might be helpful to have before you start writing, and what you don't need to have figured out before you start writing your book. The first thing that I would recommend having before you start a book is a solid understanding of the elements of conflict that make up your story. If you have a solid understanding of the conflict, the goals, and the stakes, that is a really good sign that you're in a good place to start writing the book. Since these are kind of the basic fuel of a story, they're what keep a story moving and keep a story engaging. If you understand these things, it'll really prevent you from getting stuck in a lot of cases. A lot of writers start writing and then run out of steam once they kind of run out of things to introduce, and it's because they don't have a good understanding of the conflict, goals, and stakes. Because once you get past the introductory section, this is what's going to be propelling your story. So if you understand these things, you're in a great place to start writing. The next thing is an understanding of the story's fuel and the general narrative trajectory. Some writers like to know the ending or even the entire plot. Some don't. It's really up to you, but I do think it helps to have a good understanding of your story's general trajectory. Even if you don't know the story's endpoint, it is helpful to know the general trajectory and know what you're moving towards. The next thing that it's really helpful to have is a connection with your character's voice. Being able to connect with the voice of your story is so helpful for actually getting the words down. This is something that may come within the first few chapters. It can take a bit of writing to really get to that point. It's one reason why I think writing a few test scenes or test chapters before you start the book can be a great exercise. But if you feel like you have that connection with the story's voice where it kind of just flows in a natural way, that's a great sign that it's time to start writing. It probably means you have a really good understanding of your main character if you can tap into the voice and style that you want to write in. Something else that's really great to get done before you start writing a book is any necessary research. Almost all books require at least some level of research, ranging from just a little bit to sometimes a ton. If you're writing something very research intensive, this can take a long time. It can be quite extensive, but I would recommend getting any necessary research done beforehand so you have that foundation of knowledge when you go into writing. You'll probably still have to do some research on the fly. There are always going to be things that you didn't anticipate you needed to research or look up, but kind of that necessary research you need to understand your story, it's good to get out of the way. After all, it's going to be hard to write your book if you don't have the foundation of knowledge that you need to write your story. I would also recommend having a level of outlining, world building, and organization that gives you confidence. There is no set amount of outlining that you need to do before writing your book. It can range from absolutely none to the entire story planned out in great detail, depending on the author and their preference. Really, the important thing here is to just outline to the extent that makes you feel confident. If that's nothing or very little, then that's great. If you feel confident, then it may be time to start writing. If you feel like you need the entire story outlined in kind of a really clear, accessible way, and that's what's going to make you feel confident, then that's what you should do before you start writing the book. It's kind of the same with world building. Do you feel confident going into the story with the amount of world building you've done? It just depends so much on the author and the story. There is no set amount of world building you need to do, but if you feel confident with the work you've done and the information you have, then it's a good sign that it's time to start writing. The final thing that I would recommend having before you start writing a book is a willingness to face hurdles and problems as they appear. One reason why I think a lot of writers procrastinate starting to write their books is because they're trying to get to a point where there won't be a single problem throughout the drafting process, but that's not really possible. Stuff is going to come up. Even if you outline your book in a very detailed way, you'll probably still run into problems at some point. It's kind of inevitable. It happens to everyone. Having just an understanding that problems are going to appear, and that's okay, and a willingness to tackle problems as they come up is a great mindset to have going into a book. If you're getting ready to start writing a novel and you want an extra level of guidance, both in the process and the craft, you can check out our new comprehensive course hosted by Tom Bromley. This 3-month course features daily lessons on craft, guest interviews with published authors, weekly webinars, and live editing sessions, as well as connections with your cohort of fellow writers. You can find more information linked in the description. So let's talk about some things that you don't need before you start writing your book. The first thing you don't need is to be an expert writer. A lot of writers feel like they need to be an expert at the craft before they start writing, and that simply isn't true. It's the process of writing and the experience of writing that will get you closer to being an expert, and even then, that's going to take a long time. It takes a long time to become an expert at something. So just start writing. If this is what's holding you back, it's just not necessary, nor is it realistic. You can't become an expert without actually writing. So if that's your worry, it may be time to just start the book. Along with that, you don't need to know everything about writing or writing craft. Knowing everything about writing is kind of a lifelong process, and because it is an art form, it's also a very fluid, undefinable thing. No one knows everything about anything. And especially with an art form like writing, that's always going to be shifting and developing and is also going to rely on a certain level of opinion and your own philosophy. Feeling like you need to learn everything there is about writing is kind of just an unreachable, undefinable standard and not something you have to worry about. Similarly to that, you don't need to know everything about publishing. You may want to do a bit of research on publishing and kind of know the general publishing path you want to take, but this isn't something you need to be an expert at by any means before you start writing a book. You also don't need to know every single detail of your story. Even if you want to outline the book in a very full, complete way, you definitely don't need to know everything and every single detail, nor is that really even possible. At a certain point, if you're planning out every single detail, you're kind of just writing the book. So feeling like you need to understand the story in an extremely detailed way where there's nothing that's going to be up to your creativity in the moment is almost impossible. You are capable of being creative and coming up with interesting details while writing just as much as in the outlining process. So outline to a level that makes you feel confident, but don't worry about knowing every single detail. And finally, you don't need to know backstory or world building that goes far beyond the limits of your story. Obviously, some level of backstory or world building that goes beyond the limits of your story can be helpful and can help you add depth to your story, but at a certain point, it can just become a form of procrastination. You don't need to know everything about a side character who appears in one scene, or a kingdom that we never actually visit in the story. You might learn more about these things while writing, but at a certain point, this quest to know literally everything about the world, even things that will never actually be relevant within the story, again, just kind of becomes a form of procrastination. If you feel like you know enough about the character's backstory and world to inform what's going to be on the page, and maybe a little bit beyond that, or maybe some of it is still murky and you're going to figure it out as you write, then it's okay to start writing. You don't need to know the childhood of a character who was just mentioned in one scene. So those are some tools that it's good to have before starting your book, as well as some common things that writers strive for, but are just unrealistic and also not needed before you start writing a book. So that's all for this video. Thank you so much for watching. Remember to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss any new videos. We've got new writing, editing, and publishing tips every Friday on this channel. Until next time, bye!